So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this Mass, we celebrate the feast of St. Anselm. He was one of the first archbishops of Canterbury. So if you ever hear the Canterbury Tales, it's all this pilgrimage going to this very important place in England. And this archbishop, this position was a very important one during medieval England. And St. Anselm was someone who stood up for the freedom of the church, the defense of the church during some very aggressive movements of the King of England at that time, trying to clamp down on the church. And Anselm reminded the king that the church is not a slave, but is free. And ultimately it earned him an exile, and he came back towards the end of his life. But he's someone who truly had a great pastor's heart, a shepherd's heart, to take care of his flock, even defense of the political forces of that time. He also was a great philosopher. He's one of the great ones that philosophers in that classical tradition of St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine. He's another one of the greats. And he was one of those first people, as I had mentioned, that had this understanding of we have faith that's been given to us as a gift, but the Lord has given us the gift of reason to more deeply understand that faith. It doesn't replace faith. That's what, during the time, we call that the Enlightenment, in which it was, well, let's replace faith and let's just find the truth through reason. And that got us into all sorts of trouble. And a great story version of the fruits of that is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. If you ever read that story, it's really about when we sort of push faith out of the equation and just try to do everything through reason, then we run into problems and we create a monster out of the situation. But God gave us faith, or God gave us reason as well. And this is where the church always has this beautiful virtue between two extremes. The one extreme found in the Enlightenment is, let's get rid of faith, or maybe just privatize it, and let's focus on reason, and that's really what we should be talking about. The other side is what we call fundamentalism, which is, let's just get rid of reason, and we just have blind faith. Sometimes we use that term in a good way, but blind faith is not unreasonable faith. Sometimes we use that word blind faith to sort of say, well, we check reason at the door, and we just kind of believe, but there's no real reason to it, and there's no real, sense to it. Just we believe because we believe. And yet what St. Anselm reminds us is that our faith is reasonable because God is the one that gives it. And God is the source of all reason. He's not a capricious God. This is something Pope Benedict XVI spoke of in an address called the Regensburg Address, in which he talked about the difference between Christianity and Islam. And he actually got into a lot of trouble with that. Unfortunately so, because he was also attacking our Western understanding. So he was attacking he was not attacking, but he was critiquing these kind of false notions of putting everything in sort of a scientific positivism, which is everything just has to be tested and quantified in order for it to exist or to be of importance. But then he said one of the problems that you find in these certain strands of what we call fundamentalism that you can find in Islam in certain areas is this idea of we focus on the will of God instead of the will linked with reason. And it's if God just wants to do it, if he decides that murder someday is actually good versus bad, well, he has that ability just to change things willy-nilly. And yet what Christianity helps us understand is that God is a God of order and reason. And his will is not merely just something that just goes around like this, but it's always connected to who he is. He doesn't change what mercy means. He doesn't change what truth is. He doesn't change what justice is. There may be a deepening of understanding that, and that's what this faith-seeking understanding through reason is, to go deeper and deeper to understand, what does it mean, Lord, when you are merciful? But it doesn't mean that God just changes his mind like this. Because imagine if we had a Father in heaven that didn't follow his own reason, his own order, his own way in which he created. That kind of experience would be a Father who we never know if he's going to turn on us. One day maybe he's kind of nice, and then all of a sudden he's totally different. We would then have a bipolar God. And that's unfortunately what creeps into certain strands of fundamentalism that we find in Islam, unfortunately, is the idea of when it's focused just on the will, then there's this danger that can happen in which we become more like servants, slaves, versus children, because we don't know what our master is going to do. Maybe he's a nice guy right now, but he's going to get us. But when we understand that the faith that we've been given has a true reasonableness to us, and it doesn't change, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, that's where we discover the Father of lights, from whom every good and perfect gift comes, that he doesn't change. He gives us the gift of our creation. He says that it's good in this way and according to this way, and he doesn't change that around. And that's something where we can rest in. That's one of the reasons why the church has this beautiful expression of really delighting in the sciences. I share this a lot, that most of what we have in Western civilization from the sciences comes from our Christian tradition. And that's why even now we have Vatican observatories studying the stars. We have hospital systems, we have universities, we have all these different things, and we have great saints and great thinkers, including St. Anselm, who are important for all of Western civilization. They also were believers, and they understood that God's will, his choice, his desire is always rooted in who he is. He's the Logos, which means the Word, which also means the account that is reasonable. And because it's coming from God, he makes everything else reasonable and makes sense. He pours his fingerprints into all of creation and gives it order. And so when we encounter the order and reason and goodness and truth and beauty that's found in created realities, because he doesn't change and he's reflecting himself in that, we can trust that that actually becomes a bridge to bring us deeper and deeper to understand the mystery of God. But it's still a mystery that we can't exhaust. St. Anselm also talked about the fact that just as we stare at the sun, we would be blinded by that sun. In a sense, everything becomes dark, not because there's darkness in the sun, but because there's darkness within us. But that sun helps us to see everything in its proper light. So the mystery of God, we can keep going deeper into it, and we can discover the mystery of God through looking at the way in which he moves within all of creation. They become his fingerprints. But to stare at the mystery of God, we will be blinded. And yet the Holy Spirit comes within us to give us his light. And that's why in the Psalms it says, in his light we see light itself. so that as we stare on our own power into the mystery of God and we're blinded and everything is dark, it's the Lord then who says, I've come to make you my children. I want you to see my face. I don't want you to just live in darkness, but you can't come to me on your own power. You can use reason to understand, to grow, to seek, but it's only through that illumination of my light in your life, then you're able to see. Because when this light rises up and casts out the darkness and blindness within our own heart, then we're able to see the Lord as he is. And isn't that what in the letter of St. John, one of the letters of St. John, we shall see him as he is. So let's ask the Lord for that grace to walk in the light of the Lord. And let us use the gift of reason. Let's thank the Lord that he's not a capricious God. He doesn't just do this and change his mind, but he is always unchanging. Mercy and love itself, justice and truth and wisdom. And we can rest in that promise that God covenanted himself to us. And even if we're fickle and if we change, he never changes because he cannot deny himself.